Frontal Cortex Cyberware includes 9 different pieces of equipment which can be installed onto your brain in Cyberpunk 2077 to provide a neat range of benefits and bonuses. And whilst including gear more oriented towards Netrunner builds, there's also a few things more befitting to the likes of solos and general gunslinging or katana-wielding badasses. So just as I've done with dozens of other features from this game, it's time to explore each individual piece of Frontal Cortex Cyberware, figure out their best use cases before deciding once and for all which are best. As always, massive thank you to the supporters over on Patreon for going the extra mile to support the channel. More on that at the end, but for now though, let's get to it. First up here at the bottom of the list, we have RAM Upgrade, a cheap and cheerful addition to your brain which recovers a fixed amount of RAM every second. 0.05 units at common, 0.1 at uncommon, and 0.15 at rare. If that doesn't sound like a lot to you, well, that's because it isn't. In fact, up at the maximum rare level, that's about 1 RAM unit every 7 seconds, almost. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not terrible, especially earlier in the game where RAM really counts, but it also isn't great. In fact, the Biosynergy perk right in the middle of quick hacking here recovers 1 RAM unit every 5 seconds at its level 3 tier. Look, this is definitely better than nothing, and if you come across one in early game, then get to a ripper and have it installed. Hell, it might even be worth buying, as this one is incredibly cheap and doesn't require much in the ways of intelligence attributes. But the issue is that there's no scalability, and it's absolutely worth trading out for any of the other 8 Frontal Cortex pieces. There's only 3 slots here, so let's also figure out in this video which go best together. For this, the answer is simple. Just pair it with whatever else you can get your hands on in Act 1, because honestly, I'm currently right at the start of Act 2 with an intelligence gunwoman build, and I'm really not noticing any benefit to this whatsoever. My perks and other cyberware effects are so much more powerful even just here as to make this one practically unnoticeable. Testing it out with a late game pure Netrunner build, it actually becomes outright damaging by taking up a precious slot which could otherwise be much better utilized. And the time I did this gig with this piece of cyberware was the only one where I actually had to wait on RAM recovery. With all the other RAM boosting effects, I always regened plenty. I know, ironic. Anyway, it might be marginally helpful in Act 1 where net running can only really function as a support mechanic to your guns and you barely even know any spells. Sorry, quick hacks. If you do want it though, it's available at rare tier from the Ripperdocs in Wellsprings, Downtown, and West Wind Estates. You know, places you never even visit in Act 1. The Camillo RAM Manager may be a vast step up from the RAM upgrade, but again suffers with becoming fairly obsolete as we get into the later game. The purpose of this one is to free up a certain percentage of our total RAM when it drops down to 2 units, 20% at Epic and 30% at Legendary. It's a really nice and useful effect, which also comes with a pretty hefty 4-minute cooldown. Not the most useful when an enemy base requires more than 130% of our total RAM to fully take down. Mind you, for those smaller little encampments, it might just be the exact boost that you need, though you'll be needing 12 intelligence to equip the epic tier and a whole 16 for legendary, which kind of pushes this as more of an ability to use in the latter half of the game, where you'll no doubt have unlocked the better pieces of equipment from higher up this list. It's available in both tiers from West Wind Estate at 6,400 and 11,200 respectively, so at least it's on the cheaper side. I'd personally recommend it as a piece more for the hacking gunner style builds. Players who enjoy throwing a few hacks around here and there, but mostly rely on the effectiveness of guns. Because for the pure Netrunner, waiting 4 minutes for this effect to kick in is not going to be particularly noticeable or helpful. And here's the real kicker. For Netrunners with over 18 points in intelligence, you'll probably want to buy up at some point the very useful Anamnesis perk, which prevents your total RAM from ever dropping below either 2, 3, or 4 units. Now, bearing in mind RAM has to drop to 2 units for this thing to work, that perk genuinely breaks this piece of cyberware. Like, seriously, if you've got this perk and this cyberware together, you are wasting a slot, my Netrunner friend, so go and buy something else. But for casual early quick hackers, this one may be a worthwhile friend to keep around for a bit. As I said at the start of the video, not all Frontal Cortex pieces are geared purely towards Netrunner builds, and to anybody with barely any int points but a ton in tech, you absolutely might as well equip the Mechatronic Core. This increases damage to all non-human enemies, i.e. drones, mechs, and robots, by up to 50% at Legendary tier, with the best place to acquire it being Cassius Ryder's clinic up in Northside. As you can see, it makes us pretty freaking powerful against our metal compatriots. I removed all my perks for this run and just chucked a Babaroga muzzle brake onto Yorinobu's Kongu pistol. This was incredibly fun to do and made me feel like a real badass against the robots. And you can see the difference in damage by how much less we're doing to the actual humans. It also applies to the quick hack still, allowing me to blow up this mech with one use of short circuits. This is especially powerful for glass cannon builds who need to quickly dispatch their enemies before taking any damage. And lower tier versions are available from 8 tech points, with each increasing by a sizable 10% at each level. However, it's still pretty low down because, I mean, come on. How many of these things do we actually face? Again, for non-intelligence builds, absolutely worth it in place of nothing else, but for the cultured netrunner, you already have short circuits, which, in case you didn't notice, utterly annihilates mechanical beings regardless. Now, there are extremely limited scenarios where we fight robots without humans, and on the whole, anyone who does use hacking is better off spending these slots on items which improve our performance overall. An absolute godsend to stealth netrunners next, Self-Ice is a single-tier rare quick hack which can be bought for 6,000 eddies at either Northside or Westwind Estates with the required 10 intelligence. Its purpose is to deploy intrusion countermeasure electronics, i.e. ICE, to negate the effect of enemy quick hacks. Instead of seeing this all the time when trying to stealthily take out a base, you'll see this, without having to scramble to kill the enemy who's trying to hack you. Again, pretty damn useful for stealth, especially earlier on when waiting for RAM to recharge is a genuine concern. And with a cooldown of merely 45 seconds, it's highly unlikely that anyone is going to have the time to hack you. But when you do eventually become capable of clearing a base quicker from across the street in your car than with a Sandevistan, this one is again rendered a little pointless. It may have had more versatility within combat, but as of 1.6, the only two ways enemies can hack us is either detecting where we are or applying burn effects. The former, like I say, is a useful issue to overcome, but the latter really isn't the end of the world, especially if you're able to get your hands on fireproof coating or heat converting armor. If enemies could hack us more creatively, like with blinding effects or straight up death, say, then who knows, maybe this would be higher up, but for the moment, this is unfortunately a casualty of yet another underdeveloped feature. Next is not only super useful for netrunner builds, but a potential go-to for anybody with enough intelligence points to equip it. Visual Cortex support provides an insane bonus percentage of crit damage, going all the way to 30% at legendary tier, which requires 16 intelligence. Both epic and legendary can be purchased from Westwind Estate. Now, whilst definitely useful for endgame quick hacking builds, crit hits with quick hacks only really become viable after we buy up the critical error perk. So I'd argue that this cyberware is actually more important to people who use actual weapons within an intelligence build. It is without a doubt one of the best crit damage boosting things you can acquire in the game, and it's kind of a shame that it's not available for a lot of builds. What I mean by this is generally a good build requires speccing into 2 or at most 3 attributes. Tech is normally a given for anything weapon based, whilst reflexes or body are needed to improve your actual weapon proficiency. I'd very often find I have no room for even 6 intelligence attributes to afford the common variant of this cyberware, much less the legendary. It's a shame because this would be awesome alongside a Sandevistan or Berserk, but there's really not enough reason to spec into intelligence unless you're using a cyber deck. That said, intelligence, reflexes and tech isn't a bad build combination if you want to be a total glass cannon, something I'll expand on more soon when we get to the other crit hit based cyberware. The other one, which doesn't need a high intelligence attribute, is heal on kill, a concept which I'm sure I don't have to elaborate on, other than to say that with 18 reflexes, you can buy the legendary tier, which restores 10% of health for every enemy kill. You can also see the stats of previous tiers on screen now. It's a super useful passive effect, which is especially a no-brainer for non-intelligence builds who spec into reflexes. Seriously, its competition is non-existent in that regard. Buy the epic tier from Westwind Estate as of 1.6, or the legendary from Cassius Ryder in Northside at a fairly steep 28 grand. Perfect for the majority of players, top of the list for non-netrunners. Enough said. However, as far as Frontal Cortex Cyberware goes when used in the right situations, it isn't necessarily the most potentially lucrative. And since Frontal Cortex is predominantly intelligence oriented, the question still stands. Is this worth it over other int-based cyberware? Well, if you like to hack cameras from across the street and and clear a base before you even set foot inside, then this is easily, obviously, a total waste of a slot, as you should never be taking any damage. But for hackers who like to engage in combat to spice things up a bit from the literal click creatively to kill build, this can actually be a serious contender to make life easier, again for glass cannons. With a bit of strategy, thinning out large groups ahead of time and standing behind cover as enemies filter out towards you, heal on kill can undo any stray damage you take as you shoot the remaining enemies like a badass. Just be sure not to get swarmed all at once, since there's only so fast you can heal, and it's still only 10% per foe after all. A nice straightforward concept next, the X-Disc plainly and simply increases our total RAM capacity. 1 extra RAM at rare tier, 3 at epic, and a whole 5 at legendary. Though that one does require 18 intelligence to equip and costs 22,400. It's without a doubt a nice one to have for anybody employing quick hacks and breach protocol, and is viable pretty much from the start of Act 2. RAM is of course the core component to quick hacking, so the more we have, the more we can do in quick succession. I mean, come on, it's essentially a mana system dressed up to look like science. I even still noticed the difference in how much I could hack when boosting my RAM from 22 to 27 in an endgame build, so I'd say it's definitely a strong contender throughout the entirety of your int-based playthrough. That said, there comes a time when the cooldowns of individual quick hacks become your limiting factor over RAM capacity, especially if you're not sporting the Mechatronic Rippler cyberdeck. And if that's the case, if you're never running out of RAM because it regens faster than your quick hacks cooldown, you may benefit better from something else. Still, for most of the game, it pairs really well with the cyberware that boosts our RAM regen, as it raises the ceiling for which that cyberware can have an effect. Take for example the Camillo RAM Manager from earlier. It restores 30% of your total RAM, so pairing it with the X-Disc essentially means you're restoring even more RAM when the manager kicks in. It also makes those expensive ultimate quick hacks like Cyberpsychosis viable sooner, as you'll have the RAM to afford them more quickly. All round, it's just a compliment to any intelligence build, really. Now, the even more sought-after accompaniment to the visual cortex support is the Limbic system enhancement, which increases crit chance by up to a whole 7% if you have the 15 intelligence to equip the legendary tier. I've talked a fair bit about crit chance in other videos, but long story short, any high crit chance and crit damage build in this game is going to eventually be insanely powerful and damaging. This is especially true for any type of netrunner, as no doubt you'll eventually get the legendary short circuit quick hack by either crafting or finding it. And this beauty has the passive effect of also applying short circuits on any crit hit from a regular weapon. So again, it's fine for pure netrunners once you have the critical error perk, but this one is especially valuable to me when playing the much more fun, in my opinion, hacking gunner build, which I really need a better name for before making a dedicated video on it. It's basically Lucy with guns, to sum it up. Anyway, buying this cyberware up at legendary tier from Japantown for just shy of 17k, I tested it with visual cortex supports and heal on kill. I had no perks and reflexes, just purely in intelligence. I modded all my guns with more crit chance from the penetrator mod and made sure to equip short circuit for that passive effect. I still found that my guns were doing an insane amount of damage, and no doubt they'd have done even better if I'd, spec'd into them as well. But I didn't want to make this too easy, and lo and behold, I've never felt more like the epitome of a glass cannon. I was doing great offense with this combination of guns, but going down after literally 1 or 2 hits. So again, I had to adapt my playstyle a bit to also incorporate quick hacks, using them to thin out some enemies ahead of time and letting the rest swarm me at a manageable rate, rather than dropping on me all at once. Again, it's a very fun style of build to do, combining a whole range of things I've explored in other videos, and Limbic system enhancement in general acts as a crucial bridge between quick hacking and guns. Basically, for any netrunner who actually uses weapons, this one will be a huge help if you've been speccing purely into quick hacking perks and not so much your guns. But at the top of this list, I just can't overlook how utterly broken Memory Boost can be within a pure Netrunner build. This one essentially recovers RAM upon defeating enemies. You can buy the rare version as early as 12 intelligence points for 8 grand from downtown, and this will restore 3 whole pieces of RAM for every defeated enemy. An epic version exists in the game, but annoyingly can only be unlocked with console commands. Despite this, even the rare version is still top of my list as both a mid and late game must-have, have for quick hackers. Now, I'm a huge user of short circuits, and this normally costs me 4 RAM to perform, depending on perks and chain attacks and whatnot. Sometimes it's less. Now, bearing in mind there's plenty of other things, perks and such, recovering RAM too. In fact, the Forget-Me-Not perk has the same effect, just restoring 1 unit of RAM. Now, this essentially creates an endless self-rejuvenating loop, in which using the right hacks means we'll never ever run out of RAM. Hell, grab up System Reset at Legendary, as chaining attacks with that can reduce RAM costs by up to 6. You will be getting more RAM back through this cyberware than you'll actually be putting in. And this all works great, until you get bottlenecked by the quick hack cooldowns themselves again. But without a doubt, this is one of the earliest, cheapest, and most simple ways to ensure that you ran out of RAM far less. It's great for camera hackers especially, as you truly can take out an entire base before anyone can detect you. If we were to sum it up, I'd say it's a return on investment cyberware, and whilst it's obviously not viable in all builds, it does, in my opinion, make the most noticeable difference when used right, and therefore sits at the top of my list. So let me know in the comments your favorite 3 combination of Frontal Cortex Cyberware and why. Do you just take the non-intelligence ones that you can equip, or does a careful amount of balancing and planning go in as well? As always, link to the Patreon is down in the description if any of you want to support the channel further. You could donate from as little as £1 a month for credits in each video like these awesome people, early video access, and hopefully soon ranks in my Discord, which I'm currently trying to set up. Anyway, leave a like on the video if you want more cyberware rankings. Thank you again for watching this one. I'm Sam Bram. You guys are awesome, and I hope you have a great day. Cheers.